China is attacking the U.S. and the feds are letting it happen. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The Chinese Communist Party is an expansionist power capable of comic book villain levels of evil. I swear that sentence could be the tagline for this entire channel. So what has the U.S. been doing about it? Not a lot, actually. Now, to be fair, the U.S. has taken some steps, and taking some steps is great. If they were a toddler. Personally, my bar is just a scooch higher. The U.S. military is shifting its warfighting doctrine to focus on fighting China. It's also giving Taiwan training and military aid to fight off a Chinese invasion. It's even deployed special forces in frontline islands near China. But China is waging more than just military warfare. It's engaged in unrestricted warfare, which is warfare on all fronts: political, economic, legal, cultural, you name it. Nothing is off limits for China, not even drug warfare. China is subsidizing fentanyl exports that are killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Meanwhile, the CCP has managed to entrench itself into American institutions, capture American elites, and convince national and state governments that it's okay to keep pumping money into China and ignore China's many violations of international law and human dignity. And sadly, it's still working. The U.S. has done very little to address these issues. According to this recent 300-page report from the U.S. House Oversight Committee, U.S. federal government agencies are seriously lagging behind in countering Chinese unrestricted warfare. The committee says the majority of agencies do not have a cohesive strategy to identify, counter, and deter CCP political warfare, too often because CCP influence operations have interfered with the judgment, discretion, and fulfillment of duties by federal agencies themselves. This is despite the FBI acknowledging that the threat posed by China is equivalent to the threat posed from all other foreign countries combined, which I've been saying for over 12 years. I don't know whether to feel depressed or validated. It's a new emotion. Depreciated. There are lots of glaring issues covered in the report. For example, the committee says the Consumer Product Safety Commission is failing to educate Americans about the risks posed by Chinese products. It's no secret that made-in-China products are low-quality crap. In fact, Chinese goods frequently run afoul of safety standards, sometimes with deadly consequences, like tainted Chinese-made heparin heart medication that killed over 100. But you may not know just how bad the situation is. More than 80% of examined unsafe shipments come from China. Not just unsafe, high-risk shipments too. The Consumer Product Safety Commission knows this. They told the committee, but did they warn us? No. Speaking of crappy Chinese-made products, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration appears unwilling to acknowledge that there are risks associated with America's dependence on China for pharmaceutical ingredients and medical devices. In fact, the agency regularly outsources its oversight and investigative duties to outside entities, including China, or forgoes inspections altogether. The FDA has allowed China to dictate the terms and conditions of the agency's inspections in China by providing advance notice for inspections and relying on the PRC for translation services. Yeah, that makes it pretty easy for China to hide anything that might be going wrong, especially since only 6% of inspections conducted in mainland China were unannounced or had short notice. This is like the police showing up to a house and announcing they have a warrant, but are happy to wait until the person inside is done doing whatever they're doing with all those cleaning supplies and gets back from a trip to the landfill. Sure, let's trust American health to China, the country that pumps fentanyl precursors into the U.S., has a very, very, very shady medical record, and withholds crucial information and supplies if it feels like it. To the people who say America is a Christian nation, I'm starting to believe you, because I've never seen anyone be so forgiving. Frankly, we're running out of cheeks to turn. The Agriculture Department likewise gets a failing grade when it comes to countering China. The U.S. Department of Agriculture characterized the PRC to the committee as a real but manageable threat. But USDA is more focused on keeping the PRC as a customer of the United States at the expense of Americans. the country's food supply, and the American agricultural industry. Keeping a threat as a customer. I've never seen a more perfect time to use the old "we reserve the right to refuse service" in human history. The committee also found that the Agriculture Department doesn't adequately monitor Chinese farmland purchases near U.S. military bases. You'd think it'd do something as simple as keeping track of property around sensitive sites. But nope. And don't get me started with the Commerce and Treasury Departments. It's like they don't even want to know that there's such a thing as malign Chinese influence. According to the report, the Commerce Department offices that liaise with state and local government officials lack understanding of and fail to focus on CCP influence operations, which is a huge problem since Chinese subnational influence campaigns target U.S. state and local leaders all the time. And apparently the Treasury Department doesn't even have the term CCP economic warfare in its lexicon, despite all the crazy things China does, from destroying entire economies with its Belt and Road initiatives, to conducting raids on businesses and arresting people on dubious charges. The Treasury Department continues to engage in normalized bilateral discussions with the CCP as if it were an ordinary trading partner. In fact, Treasury believes discussing engagement and involvement with the CCP in bilateral and international forums will solve CCP subversion. And that gets to the heart of why the U.S. federal government is still doing such a lousy job at countering China. For decades, the U.S. foreign policy establishment and government agencies have operated on the assumption that engaging with China is the best way to manage China and turn it into a cooperative world partner. The fact that I started that last sentence with "for decades" and we still have such huge problems shows how effective it's been. Those working in the science industry, like NASA, the National Institute of Health, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Science Foundation, as well as big corporations, are big fans of this kind of thinking, which, as we all know, has worked out super well for the rest of the world. U.S. federal agencies are very hesitant to even consider China as a uniquely dangerous threat that deserves to be treated as such. The State Department is also a big fan of the engagement school of thought regarding China, which is why we've often heard government officials talk about something along the lines of managing competition and cooperating where we can cooperate. But China's belligerent actions prove that engaging China for the sake of engagement doesn't work. China exploits this. Worse yet, it leaves us psychologically unprepared to counter a Chinese attack. According to the House Oversight Committee, overall, the State Department is unwilling to acknowledge the full scale of the threat posed by the CCP to the United States. It refuses to admit that the U.S. is already engaged in a Cold War with the CCP. I'm starting to question the State Department's competency, because despite having a China House, it can't even explain what political warfare is. Did I say starting to question? I meant actively and aggressively question. The State Department also can't determine the number and nature of the many memorandum of understanding it has entered into with China, the CCP, and Chinese-owned entities, although the estimate was close to 1 million. When people in government keep pretending that war isn't already happening, government agencies don't prepare for the worst-case scenarios as they should. For example, agencies like the Department of Homeland Security haven't even considered the cascading impacts across infrastructure sectors of a cyber attack on a port. And the Department of Transportation has no plan to protect American national security interests against the CCP's unrestricted warfare targeting critical maritime and transportation networks and infrastructures. At this point, the U.S. might as well open a new office, the Department of Wearing the World's Largest Kick Me sign. Even when federal agencies do plan for conflict, they run the risk of severely underestimating China and downplaying the threat China poses. For a long time, that's what the Defense Department has done, and in many ways it continues to do so to this day. According to the House Oversight Committee, while the DoD now recognizes the CCP's strategy, it continues to underestimate CCP unrestricted warfare and has not yet demonstrated that its actions align with this new posture. The U.S. government can't afford to keep thinking that things will be better if we just pretend there's no conflict, or that China is too weak to do anything. I'm starting to think that if China launched an active nuclear strike, the U.S. official response would just be, looks like someone's got a case of the Mondays. Like it or not, China sees the U.S. as an enemy and is treating it as such through a whole of society approach. And we need to find ways to counter China effectively on all fronts, not just militarily. That's why education is absolutely key. According to the report, some officials are only just learning about the threats posed by China. If only there were a video series that's been running for 12 years, actively educating about such threats. If only. Many others still lack knowledge and training on how exactly to deal with China. The Education Department is among them. It has no counter-China strategy to protect American and Chinese students on U.S. campuses from CCP harassment and intimidation. I guess you can't have a strategy if you don't even have a comprehensive understanding of what you're dealing with. For a department that's entirely dedicated to education, that sounds pretty stupid of them. What's especially stupid is how the Education Department claimed that they have received no reporting regarding national security concerns about Chinese students and scholars associations, which frequently act as the CCP's eyes and ears. Somehow they completely missed all the publicly available reports about China's influence operations in American campuses. As much as they say about keeping students safe, the Education Department is taking little to no action to protect American campuses from Chinese intimidation and harassment. Gee, I wonder why. At least they can still count in denominations of 20 and higher. It's no wonder retired Colonel Grant Newsham, who's cited on multiple occasions in the committee report, says the U.S. needs to do a better job at exposing the CCP and its political warfare. But you know who does a better job than the government, according to Newsham? China Uncensored. Seriously, Newsham testified to Congress that private outlets such as China Uncensored are excellent at educating large audiences about PRC malign affairs and the need to do something about them. These shows are factual, informative, produced on a shoestring budget, have nearly 2 million subscribers, and the Chinese government hates them. Which means just by watching China Uncensored, you're doing better than most of the US government. Which makes me feel very depreciated. Thank you for watching. And before YouTube kicks you to some random video, check out the latest episode of my show Deep Thoughts While Gaming about Hearts of Iron 4 and the rise of nationalism. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.